I've been Team iPhone for 7 years, and the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 5 is making me question my loyalty. But is it actually a good phone or just a nostalgic gimmick? And after using the Z Flip 5 for a few weeks, I'm here to tell you how remarkable, if at times underwhelming, this thing can really be. Remember, the Z Flip 5 costs the same as a new iPhone, and clearly Samsung cares about this idea because, wow, the external display is massive compared to the Z Flip 4. And we finally have the wedgeless, it still has a negligible 2mm gap, but who's counting, foldable that everyone's been dreaming of. But I just don't understand why I'm so drawn to this thing when I'm perfectly comfortable with my iPhone 14 Pro Max. Well, Brett satiated my morbid curiosity and gave me permission to take this bad boy home, and I can't believe he trusted me that much. The foldable hinge is obviously the main selling point. I mean, flip is in the name of the device, but it's a feature that houses several others within it, which we'll get to, but I have to address a few things first. Yes, it's super satisfying to flip open and closed. And I could probably do this until the end of time, but my squishy mortal body just won't let me do that. Like me, the Z Flip 5 is very much mortal, although it is IPX8 water resistant or submersible up to around 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. There is no dust resistance. This is why it's so important that the model has the new wedgeless design to make it less prone to straight up clamshelling into a pile of dust and ruining the screen. It can still happen, but now it's a tiny bit safer. Coming from an iPhone though, this is a little concerning. All modern iPhones and even the flagship Samsung mobile devices have an IP68 rating, meaning they do have dust resistance and can be submerged up to 6 meters for up to 30 minutes. I feel very confident about my iPhone's durability, but the Flip 5, not so much. But that's just one of the sacrifices that has to be made for the Flip. That and the crease, which is definitely noticeable, but really only when the interior screen is either off or you're viewing it from an angle. It feels a little weird gliding your fingers over it all the time, but you get used to it pretty easily. Thankfully, it's sturdy enough for usual wear and tear, which is important. Moving from the standard candy bar, the Z Flip 5 could be a cause for concern for those worried about their device's durability. It's definitely not going to be as sturdy as my iPhone 14 Pro Max, while the hinge is open anyway. I have yet to feel the need to be delicate with this thing any more than other smartphones. Also, when the Z Flip 5 is closed, it feels incredibly solid. The cover screen is made out of Gorilla Glass, which is more necessary than you'd think because the device is super glossy and slippery to the touch. I'd really recommend getting a case to give the Flip 5 a more grippy texture so you're not misinputting and dropping the device like I've been. Samsung's nomenclature referring to anything having to do with the Z Flip 5's flippiness is flex, which is where things get interesting. You can enable flex mode in any app you want, which enables you to control the phone entirely from the bottom portion of the screen whenever you partially fold it. I actually really like it because it essentially just turns your phone into a tiny laptop with a little touchpad on the bottom and a cursor that you can move around on the top portion of the interior screen. And it's really cool to see it happening in my hands because this is the kind of experimental jank that we would never see come out of an iPhone, until it's anything less than cohesive at least. Some apps on the Z Flip 5, like the camera and YouTube, even have custom supported versions of this that justifies such an overall weird feature that should technically still work to a certain extent on a normal non-foldable device. Even if you're not in flex mode, you're still able to use the flex orientation as a sort of kickstand. This makes it good for watching YouTube videos while you're cooking, cleaning, or basically anything else, which is awesome because I am just always watching silly little videos while doing other stuff. I just can't help but be a little disappointed though, because watching videos on my 14 Pro Max propped up with a pop socket just looks better. I'll tell you what my iPhone can't do though, run multiple apps on the same screen at the same time. And while that's not necessarily a new Android feature, it's new to me, dang it, and it tickled my lizard brain to be able to watch Family Guy compilations on one side of the screen and play Subway Surfers on the other. You could also probably use this for like productivity and work and emails and other stuff, but I like the Family Guy thing. I am able to watch things in picture-in-picture mode on my iPhone, but the ability to run two non-video oriented apps side by side just isn't integrated in the iPhone ecosystem. And while videos might not look as amazing while the screen is flexed, the sound is way better. Since there's a speaker on the bottom of the device, it shoots the audio straight towards you, which makes up for the smaller picture a bit. I did toy around with slightly bending the screen while in landscape mode and propping it up to watch videos, on the Flip 5, but it just kind of didn't look right, and the viewing angle was terrible, so I would not recommend this. What I would recommend is the Flex display, which is the external display on the Z Flip 5, and oh boy, is this thing nicer than the one on the Z Flip 4. On this generation, you're getting a 720 by 748 AMOLED display that has a max brightness of 1600 nits, making it fully visible outside in daylight, which is great because it almost functions like a smartwatch display. It's kind of like a separate OS that complements the main event, if that makes sense. It's something Apple can't even pretend to compete with right now. We've heard rumors of a foldable iPhone, but even if it's real, we'll never get a good look at it until this type of technology becomes more meaningful to potential customers. Other reviewers have talked about how the Flex display sort of functions as a way to use your device with less of a commitment because there's fewer features available to you until you fold it open, which I agree with since it gives you the time, easy camera access, a handful of widgets like the weather, a calendar, call history, notifications, etc. But what I really like is the ability to have a separate app drawer available from the external display for certain apps that have been optimized for this weird screen size. I have YouTube, WhatsApp, and Google Maps loaded on right now, and it's legitimately impressive and satisfying to be able to type back to my group chat on a full-sized QWERTY keyboard on this awesome tiny display. And what's more is that the supported apps here have continuity. So for example, if you have the YouTube app open up on the external display and open up the phone, bam, you'll be in the same app in the same spot on your phone. Is that completely necessary? No. Is it convenient? Absolutely. That continuity also applies to the camera too, which makes it super versatile. Google Maps is a cool addition as well, as janky as it looks on the tiny display. This could be really useful for when you're walking around. You don't have to have a massive block that is the iPhone in your hand. Instead, you just have a cute little folded up Flip 5 that sits safely in your palm. Maps kind of wants to position you off center a little bit, which is annoying, but still cool. I did try putting a pop socket on the back part of the Flip to use with my pop socket car mount I have on my dashboard, but since so much of the Flip 5 is screen real estate, it just became an inconvenience because it sits so low on the phone you can't use it as a landscaped kickstand like on my iPhone because it's not centered enough, and when the Flip is in flex mode, it just falls over. So if you do want to mount the Flip 5 in your car, one of those magnetic pad things might be a better idea. Also, I want to bring up what I've been calling tent mode. If you're using the cover display, you can sort of half open the phone to use another kickstand orientation. And while it's cool to have it as an option, and it kind of reminds me of the Lenovo Yoga, it doesn't make a ton of sense. The only thing I can see you using this for is watching videos, and the cover display is lower resolution, and now the speakers aren't firing towards you, so the audio quality is noticeably worse. And while this isn't a feature that's comparable to anything that an iPhone can offer, when you think about how much more useful this is than the Flip 4 screen that's way smaller and basically only shows notifications, it seems like a massive jump. The Flip 5's camera is something I'm equally disappointed and excited about. On one hand, having access to the two 12-megapixel rear-facing cameras makes taking selfies effortless and photos can look amazing. But on the other hand, it feels less fleshed out than Apple and Samsung's other flagship devices. I feel like the Flip in the Flip 5 provides a unique photography experience because of the built-in selfie capabilities and the ability to use the device itself as a kickstand or tripod. The photos are definitely comparable to the ones you can take on an iPhone 14 Pro, but the lack of a telephoto lens is kind of painful at this price point. Oh yeah, this thing costs $1,000, which is the same price that the 14 Pro is going for. That being said, the portrait mode on the Z Flip 5 genuinely surprised me. This thing actually takes some awesome selfies. You can even pinch to zoom out while on the selfie mode on the exterior display to access the wide angle lens, which makes taking selfies where, let's say, your entire family is sitting at the table at a restaurant way easier to capture. The first day I spent with the Z Flip 5, I was driving home and noticed a person riding a motorcycle a few cars back wearing a really weird helmet while we were stopped at a red light. I was able to confidently pick up the Flip 5 while it was closed, open the camera, and then confidently snap this picture with the 12-megapixel camera to get a better look at the guy for later. That's something I would have never even thought of doing with my iPhone, because I know too much quality would have been lost at the distance to make anything out with the built-in selfie cam. The internal camera on the Flip 5 though, it's actually kind of whack. I think it just looks washed out and grainy, especially when compared to the other cameras. This wouldn't be a problem really, except for in some apps like Snapchat that don't allow you to close the device and use the good cameras for selfies, as far as I could find, which is a little bit of a letdown. But you can always just use the native camera app to import photos into those apps, which again is an absolute joy on the external display. The camera icon is right there when the little screen lights up, and you can even set the power button to auto open the camera when you double press it. No, you're not just locked to 1x1 like I thought at first, and take photos, videos, and even portrait mode photos right from your tiny little flex display, all of which also applies to whenever you have the device unfolded too. But while it's unfolded, you can also display a preview of the photo on the exterior display too, which I thought was pretty neat. You can even adjust your zoom levels from the external display, which, believe it or not, you couldn't do on any of the other Z Flip phones. It's not as high quality of an experience as an iPhone 14 Pro Max, but it is much more of a tailored one. Something that you definitely couldn't do on the older phones is the insane levels of customization that the Z Flip 5 gives you access to. You can legitimately give this device a meaningful makeover using just the pre-installed configurations for the lock screens. Both the interior and exterior lock screens are fully customizable, from the wallpaper patterns to the variations of those patterns to the colors in the variations of those patterns, all the way down to how your notifications are delivered to you. Want a different font on your clock? Here you go. Move it slightly to the left and make it really small. You bet. You can spend a lot of time setting up your ideal look in this thing, and it's all part of the experience. It kind of reminds me of when Apple released iOS 16 and they had all those new lock screen customization options, but here it's somehow done even better. You can somehow legitimately create a really personalized lock screen without even using any of your own custom images, which is really cool. This phone is adorable, and I love making it even cuter with these little features. But with the device this quirked up, there's actual drawbacks that are kind of hard to ignore. This thing sports a 3700 milliamp hour battery, which is fine, but nothing more. It's got a little more juice to it than the Flip 4, but not much, especially if you're like me and really enjoy having an always-on display on the device's exterior, which is something I've really grown accustomed to while using the iPhone 14 Pro Max. The Flip 5's outside screen is locked to 60 Hz, unlike the interior's 1 to 120 variable refresh rate. And because of this, there's way too much power being constantly delivered to the outside display, so I wouldn't recommend keeping it always on, but I'm gonna keep it on anyway and just keep complaining about it, and you can't stop me.
What an effective way to deal with your problems.
There's enough power in it to keep you going until the end of the day, but nothing really beyond that. Unlike my iPhone that I've occasionally forgotten to charge at night, and it got me through the next day no problem. And since the Z Flip 5 is such a weird shape, you'll probably notice it only gets hot on the top part. That's because that's where the battery is. And also, that prevents proper thermal dissipation, so it throttles hard, especially when you're doing some intensive Android gaming. It's something that you may or may not notice, but at the very least, can serve you some battery life. Speaking of gaming, it actually feels really nice to play something like Call of Duty Mobile on the Flip 5, because the screen has a weird aspect ratio of 22:9, but it gives a really cool ultra-wide effect that I've never experienced in mobile gaming before. And the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy is the expected amount of snappy and performancy.
You mean Dragony?
Dragon what?
Nope.
But unfortunately, the goofy screen shape also makes this thing weirdly thin in certain apps like Discord and Chrome. I actually found that using the Samsung web browser is preferable to me because you can adjust the default zoom levels and make it look a little less cramped. Also, just a couple of side notes, even if you don't have the Flex View enabled on the YouTube app, it'll still do this cool thing where it blacks out the top and bottom portions of the upper half of the interior display when you bend it. It made me way more excited than it should have. But does all of that stuff make the gimmick that is the Flip worth the money? Well, maybe. If you're someone who values your time, you could argue that the separation of functionality between the open and closed states of the Flip 5 can keep you from wasting your day on your phone in certain instances. iPhones don't give you that "are you sure you want to commit" step that is opening the phone. And one wrong move can send you doom scrolling for the next hour. Checking your messages on the Z Flip 5 isn't nearly as risky because you can just do it without fully unlocking your device and you won't get tempted by Reddit. If you get bothered by little things, it's important to note that the Flip 5 a lot of the time won't lay at a perfect 180 degrees, but more like 179. Let me be clear. From a technical perspective, this device is all around a downgrade from an iPhone 14 Pro, but you're also getting 2 screens for the price of 1, or more accurately, 1.5 screens for the price of 1. Committing to the Z Flip 5 is compromising on quality and usability to effectively dual-purpose your mobile device as a fidget toy. But if that fidget toy also had a bunch of cool and unique features, I personally would like to see some better folding integration with apps that use the camera so I can do things like take higher quality selfies on apps like Snapchat. But that'd require way more mainstream adoption of the Flip format. But also a more robust battery life and wider vertical aspect ratio might sell me more on the Flip 5 too. Probably the biggest barrier for me to switch though is my Apple credit card.
Oh, I got you locked in.
Oh yeah. See, Apple makes you set up their credit card payments through the settings in your iPhone, which makes it seem really daunting to try and escape their platform. And if that's scaring you into staying with them, don't worry. It's just like a normal credit card. You are able to pay your bill through their website just like any other credit card. You'll just be forgoing the Apple Pay capabilities. I've seen a lot of people excuse the fact that the Z Flip 5 compromises on hardware by saying that it makes up for it in charm and customization, and they're not wrong. But the serotonin that I get from snapping this thing closed is chef's kiss. And I think I understand why now. It's just fun. Swapping to the Z Flip 5 from the iPhone 14 Pro Max isn't a practical decision, but neither is buying a Miata, staying up late playing Fortnite, or being a YouTuber. I could go into more detail about how revolutionary the external display is by limiting your access to time-wasting apps while consuming less battery life, but I just don't feel like I have to. If you like the idea of having this coupled with the nostalgic, oh so satisfying snap you get when you flip this thing shut, you're likely already sold on the idea of buying it. It's understandable to be skeptical of using this thing, but I promise you, if you're excited about the flip aspect, this device gives you every opportunity to make as much use out of it as possible. Don't get me wrong, it's completely unnecessary and honestly a little hard to get used to at first, but I just think it's neat. And who knows, maybe we'll look back at this in 10 years wondering why the heck did we want to have foldable screens anyways? But for now, I'm just glad that I got to be a part of this mess. If you want this thing, I say get it.